Hello, class. Let's start with chapter 2. Hopefully, you've seen chapter 1. Chapter 1, I did something a little different with the green screen and something more interactive or dynamic. Hopefully, you've seen that video. If you haven't seen the video, I encourage you to go back and see that first. As you know, history is a sort of linear chronological timeline that will, it's better to understand it as it unfolds. So let's go to chapter 2. And I won't take too much time because you do have the book, and hopefully you've seen the book, and hopefully there's other videos that kind of links that's really helping you understand this. But I'm just going to go really quickly into helping you understand some key points into this, and at the same time, at the end I'm gonna go over a lot of the questions, and not little questions from the test, but we're going to do a little review that will really help you for the quiz, for the for the following exam happening very soon. So hopefully you stick along till the end. So let's start with the chapter 2, and we're going to get to this chapter ends with the Greek culture. And so first we're going to start talking about other civilizations, the Minoan and the Mycenaean in particular. And the reason why it's important to know these is because they are really shaping, they really are shaping the future of the Greek. You will see a lot of the things that they started. Basically, I want you to see the Minoans and the Mycenaean as something that, as the way that they started, what eventually the Greek will perfect. What the Greek, and it's sort of weird to say perfect because many would argue that the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, they did perfect themselves. But the reason why we can say perfected it is because the Greek sort of took it to a place that eventually became known throughout everywhere, even affecting the Western world eventually. So that is one of the reasons why the Greek sort of seems more the final product, and the Minoans and the Mycenaeans seem a bit more of the early stages of what eventually will become. And in the Greek, they do adopt a lot of these things. So they're not really at fights. The Minoans and the Mycenaean culture, they're not really at fight to what eventually will become. They just simply feel like it's a big mixture of everything. So something that's important to understand about history is its context. You need to understand what was happening at those times, because architecture, one of the reasons architecture is so important is because architecture is a reflection of what's happening in the outside world. It's really a reflection of the common culture, the common ideas, the common viewpoints, and the common philosophies, the common advancements such as science and engineering. All of these things are reflection of what's happening in those times. So this is a very clear chronological order of what we're going to be going through. Again, Minoans and Mycenaeans in the Bronze Age, and eventually getting into the Greek period. It's important to talk about the Iliad and the Trojan War, which are not time periods, but they're something that the Iliad and the Odyssey is this collection of stories written by Homer. And Homer, we don't really know if it was a person or it was a pen name or it was a collection of stories of people eventually combining them and just saying there's all these different stories that we've heard, and we're just going to name it that Homer said it, perhaps. And so, but the Trojan War is one of the stories, one of the great stories there that is fine there, combining with, combined also with the Odyssey. And the Trojan War, maybe you've seen it, I think there's a movie, there's a lot of depictions in common media of the Trojan War. It was a great war that happened eventually leading to the Trojan Horse and all of these things. So the reason why this is important is because it's important to know these stories are shaping the art and are shaping the view that the Greek have of themselves, and that it's important to have this sort of as a context. And also, once we start getting to the life of Plato and the Greek and Alexander, we start seeing that we went from the Neolithic dealing with Stonehenge, dealing with megalith construction, and finally ending with the Egyptians. They were very static. They were all of their artwork, their sculptures were very static. They care more about the depth, they care more about that. But most of their work was very static. You didn't see a lot of movement. But in the Greek world, you're going to start seeing that they started playing a lot with the human proportions, creating this idealized version of humans, of saying the perfect beauty. Basically, they were trying to say this is the perfect beauty, the perfect representation of beauty, and you can start seeing that in their sculpture. So that's another thing that's very important to know. So let's start with the Minoans, and the Minoans is very it's one of the earliest 4,000 years of Neolithic settlements. It lie under the Minoan side. So we're still in this ending the era of the Neolithic settlements, and it wasn't really found until 1900s by Sir Arthur Evans. And why this is important is it was unknown to the modern world until the 1900s. That's crazy to even imagine that it took so long for us to discover this. But once he discovered, Sir Arthur Evans did something that some are thankful and some are, I don't know, but basically he took his own artistic expression, and he started restoring all of the structures to what he believed was the way they had done it. So the colors and all of these things that you start seeing, it wasn't really the way it was found. It was Sir Arthur Evans' own expression, own idea of what he concluded would look. And so, again, take it, you can be the judge if it was good or bad that he did this. But even nowadays, they're restoring a lot of this, but they're even restoring what he's done. So if the color that he painted is already fading, they're painting it again. So in a way, they're restoring of a painting. So that's sort of interesting to know. The Minoans, one of the things that is they're very known for is the Minotaur. So you can even see that in their name, Minos. So they were from the island of Crete, and 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 in Crete they built this great temple called Anossos. And there was other ones, but this one was the biggest one. So this is why we sort of focus on this one. So, but also I want you to have a clear understanding that this is the only one. There was many others, but the Knossos, the Palace of Knossos was the biggest one. And so I want this is a floor plan. We've talked about floor plan section, elevations, perspective drawings, and this is a floor plan. So what do you see? What you see? What is something that you start noticing in this? Hopefully you start seeing this axis. Always start looking for the entrance and start looking at how it's moving, how it's sort of guiding you into the building. Then we start seeing some sort of open area. This is a central court. So we probably understand that a lot of the things happen right here, and it sort of started going. It's interesting here that we see that there's a grand stair created by, so Sir Arthur Evans even took the liberty of creating, adding to the architecture that was already, again, take it if it was good or bad, it's really your perception. But something that is interesting to see is this sort of labyrinth-like pattern here. You start seeing that it's sort of like many little rooms, sort of labyrinth-like, and even if you sort of see it from above, and I give you no context, and I would tell you this is the labyrinth, you would probably say, okay, I can see that. And one of the reasons they believe of this labyrinth sort of thing is and labyrinth analysis was because of the minotaur that we have talked about, which is a half. There was this someone that had a relationship with the bull, leading to the birth of this this creature, if you could say that, that was half man and half bull. And this is depicted all over art. I think even Picasso eventually starts painting this. I think he was really fascinated by this idea of what it meant to him. And so and the story says that he would eat about seven uh, children and seven girls every seven boys, seven girls every day. And so again, this is stories that are found in the perhaps they build their architecture around this story. They built their architecture around story that perhaps for that the people that living there could maybe could have, maybe they used it as some sort of fear to in case someone did something bad, this is we're going to be feeding you to the Minotaur. So they constructed all this architecture sort of reflecting a lot of their mythological sort of views. So again, that's very interesting. If you start asking yourself why do they do this sort of labyrinth shape, you start seeing stuff like that. And something interesting about the Minoans is that they favor the very organic and the curvilinear. There was someone that very favored all these organic shapes and very curvilinear shapes in their art. So that's something interesting that we start seeing. I don't think there's pictures here, but they worship the goddess of snakes. And something interesting again, they started worshiping snakes, but there wasn't snakes there, so there was something that they adopted from somewhere else, which again itself is it's interesting to know. The last thing that I want to talk about this is that there's not an image from outside here that I could probably bring, but this isn't. If you start seeing from the outside, you see that this is not a very fortified area. No signs of fortification. So it just seems that they were um, not really focused on that. There was just civilization that had a palace, had a community, but at the same time weren't really looking into joining a war or being afraid of that. So again, that's very interesting to start seeing this, which is very different compared to the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans, if you look at it here, it's called a citadel. So citadel is basically a fortification on a hill. It's sort of this, the word itself means altitude or high place or even palace. So it's usually like a fortress, a palace up in a hill, and you can see this. And if I ask you, why do you think they did that? Maybe you start guessing, if this sort of seems like a fortress, and having the high ground gives you an advantage to be able to see when your enemy is coming. So again, ask yourself, what is the motive? What is the means? What is the ability? Those are the three things we ask ourselves as we put on our architectural historian hats. And we see, okay, what is the motive? Probably protection. Probably, they were constantly attacked. If you want to build this high, there has to be a reason behind it. So they're more like, more fortified, looking for the high ground. And we start seeing this sort of the side plan of the whole thing. When we talk about side plan is it has the word plan. So again, it's an aerial view of the whole layout. We have a scale here for scale, but a side plan is taking into consideration the site itself, so the land itself, and nearby things. So sometimes in a site plan, you'll see nature. You see if there's trees, maybe there's existing water features, there's a river, there's things like that. So a site plan is a combination of um, different things, not just the specific structures. So here we see a site plan of the whole land, of the whole fortified city, the citadel, and we start seeing this Lion's Gate, which is the entrance, the big main entrance of this place. And we start seeing, and it's interesting how they call it the Lion Gate. Again, if they're saying that they're this fortified city, the Lion Gate, even that name sounds a bit scary, or a bit uh, 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 challenging for the people that are coming in. And we have different entrances, as you can start seeing, rather than the other one from the Minoans. The other ones seem more clear, um, packed things, but here it seems everything's a bit more spaced out. The entrances are not very, except for this one, but they're not in a very clear path, not very inviting. So people inside, there were another gate, and this one is sort of closest to more houses. So this was more maybe of a community base, rather houses here, but the palace being in the center again had more of a protection. And you start seeing, the North Gate, and this is the plan of Terence. So again, so when you see site plan, you see the whole thing, but when you see just the plan of specific, you kind of zoom in just into that without considering of the land or where it's standing on. And again, I'll let you look into this floor plan, which is very, very, very interesting. But I want to talk to you about the Lion's Gate. I think the Lion Gate. I keep saying lions because there was two of them, but let me talk a little bit about the Lion Gate. One of the things that it's important to talk about is that they have this what they call with Cyclopean masonry. And Cyclopean masonry is that they have this huge stones that were the weight tons, and the walls were about 20 feet thick. So just imagine that how thick the walls. Just to give you an idea, the average thickness of a house, of weight in a house right now is 6 to 8 inches. So it's you would need how many inches to make how many walls of a normal house to get to 20 feet. That's crazy. And this stone, it's weighs 20 tons. So just this one stone, the one in the center, this lintel here, this sort of beam, it weighs 20 tons. So the reason why they called it Cyclopean masonry is because they believe that, again, going back to the Iliad and going back to the Odyssey, the Cyclops were this giants with one eye. Cyclops coming from having one eye, and they're said, the story goes that giants were the ones that constructed this, and that's how they could carry these huge stones. Who knows? Who knows the story of that is really true. Uh, I love this Lion Gate. Is probably one of the things that I've studied a lot, which is why I'm staying here a little bit. But the reason why I find it so fascinating is because, again, the weight, and they start doing something what is called corbelling. And corbelling is you start seeing how these stones are sort of layering one on top of each other, sort of stepping, going a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further. And by doing that and having it cut in that precise angle, allow for the weight to be distributed, allowing for this to be able to hold and create a taller building. They create this lioness. Some people say they're lions, some say they're lioness. So it's really up to you choose which one you think it is. But this lioness, what they believed is that they did have heads, and what they believed is that heads were sort of facing the people coming in. Some people have even thought that they were like griffins, or this sort of combination of a lion and a bird, and which is why the head was a different shape, and some a different shape, or even different material, perhaps of gold. And so you can just imagine this bird-like, maybe even of a lion head, just full of gold looking at you. Another thing that's interesting to see is you see this sort of pedestals, this sort of and these were used for altars. Later on, we see them used in inside altars. So it's sort of this religious, sort of sacred something that's happening. And also, as you can start seeing, this lion or lioness or lions, they're not on their 4 feet just standing how they would normally. They're standing on this altar pediment sort of thing, And as they start standing up, you start seeing how they sort of start becoming more human-like. They're becoming more taking the shape of human-like. So maybe transforming into something. And what's another thing that's very important, seeing this column that again, this Mycenaeans and the Minoans were eventually shape and really help eventually lead. And so you start seeing this early representations of these columns. So this is a very, very interesting gate. This is within the top of my list to eventually go and visit and one day walk under this gate. And if you can hear my excitement right now, I can just imagine how I'm gonna feel when I actually see it in person. As I keep going, there's this sort of honeycomb what they call was the treasury of Atreus, and it's believing that what they store all these things are basically big storage. But again, what's very interesting is that you start seeing this corbelling, which is layered stepping stone sort of brick stone layer one top of each other to create this shape and to have the stability to be able to do that. And then this is sort of that entrance leading into the treasury of Atreus, and we see the corbelling here inside of that place. And again, this is one of the places that I also want to visit, hopefully very soon. And so we start seeing all these things happening in the Minoan culture and the Mycenaean, and eventually sediment decline, perhaps the face of invasions. The Dorians and the Ionas pushing down the peninsula. The invaders used mountain cavalry with iron weapons, and the Mycenaeans, since they only had bronze armory, eventually dealing to they just sort of ending that their sort of culture and time. And out of this confusion, the classical Greece period started. And this is where we go into Greece now, the Archaic period or dark age of the Greek peninsula. And we start seeing different things of, specifically temples that are starting to being built. And the Mycenaeans, and so the Greek, they started following something that the Mycenaeans had used in a temple in Megaron, which it's there. I didn't cover it, but it's in the book. You can go above and see it. But it consists of a room, or opistomus, so this is the main room, the naos, which is the altar sort of at the top, and then the front porch or the pronaos. So judging from this, you can start seeing how the temples are starting to take shape. So temples are going to be something that is going to be really, really, really important. We're going to start seeing temples starting to arise all over, following this sort of three things ideas. And here we see it in this plan of the Temple of Hera of Olympics. Something also that I want to mention is that in those times, Greece wasn't called Greece for them. For them, Greece, it was actually called Helen, and we'll see that later on. Just wanted, if you see a lot of H words, Hera, things like this, it's sort of coming from that. Again, so this is sort of the plan that they sort of adopted from the Megaron, and it's this pronaos, which is the sort of entrance that have this antis column, and so antis it just means like entrance or pre columns or something like that. And you start seeing this sort of entrance, and then finally get to this to Sela or Noah, which was the actual altered place. So this was the most important place. There's a lot of temples that I want you to start seeing. Look for the Sela. Always look for the Sela because it's usually the most important thing. You start seeing this axis guiding you into this. And then we have the Opisthedomos, which is basically the porch, the back part, the outside. So all of this is a sort of three-part way, and outside they have this columns of the peripheral colonnade. So everything, look for what's happening in the perimeter. what's happening in the center. That's another thing that you very easy to for you start understanding architecture is what's happening in the perimeter, what's happening in the axis, so how is this guiding you, and what's happening in the center. I love the spacing. I love how they placed it, everything, that it wasn't even structural. A lot of it, there's a big thing that happens during this time called redundancy. And redundancy is simply the fact that they do it one, in case one fails, they have another one. So let's say for some reason they don't need three, but if this one starts losing, it falls, they have two more. So it's sort of having a plan A, plan B, have a C. And that's something that I didn't mention, but also the Egyptians had that. Inside of the pyramids, there's a lot of redundancy structurally inside in case one fails. So basically, they over structuralize this, and the same thing is happening here. But perhaps here is not so much structurally, but more about the beauty and trying to create this sort of perfect geometry. Again, we've talked about the Greek wanted to create this idealized version of how the world looks, and everything was about proportions, and we start seeing that later on, and in the ways they use um, the mints and the things that the way they decorate things. So we started understanding this intercolumniation. We start seeing this plan of the temple Hera. Again, you start seeing the same pattern of the stela in the center, an entrance and a sort of porch. And 10% is one of the earliest examples of Doric order is unusual, having an order of columns across the short side, placing a column in the center where one would expect inter-column space. So what is interesting about this one, it's very unusual to have odd numbers. Again, we've talked about this sort of perfection. So having this odd number in this sort of, cutting thing is something that it's a little interesting that they did this. We'll talk about Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, but as we saw in the Minoan and the Mycenaeans, these types of columns were already being played with, but the Greek simply created into an order, a very this is how it should be in a very clear way that others could be doing. So there's three, the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian, and it's interesting how this temple has a combination of the three. Doric on the outside, Ionic in the inside, and Corinthian, and one Corinthian right at the center. It's interesting how that sort of starts to happen. It's very important that you know this, the Doric order. It's in the Parthenon, but it's important for you to know that the differences between Doric and Ionic. The Doric is more masculine. So as you can see, the base at the bottom of the column is pretty wide, and it starts getting really wide and slowly becoming more slim on the top. And Vitruvius, we talked about Vitruvius previously, but Vitruvius talked about this column being more masculine and talking about its masculinity. And we'll look later on at the Ionic, and we'll see how he describes that one a bit more feminine. So that's interesting to see how he does that. And so we're just seeing this. It's a bit more simple. This one's a bit more simple, and something that that they did was having this top part, which is called the entablature. So right above the capital of the column and the capital itself. It's a lot to kind of remember, to be honest. But it sort of will make sense as you start seeing a couple of times. So this whole part is called the capital. And even the capital has the abacus, which is the top part. The iconus is this sort of it's called this edging into the column itself, and then the necking is this bottom part. And so it's interesting to see is that there's these cuts. So they were never just built as one huge thing, but there was different sections as they were being built. The architrave, and one of the most important things that I want you to see is the frieze. The frieze, they had a triglyph, and the word tri, as you all know, might have known already, it stands for three. So they always have these three lines. Right now, sort of four because it's sort of blending with another ones. But later on, you'll see, and you'll just have like sort of three spaces, one, two, three. Here's creating the three spaces. The metope is the centerpiece that creates this sort of a place where they would add these cultures and this depict their stories, depict the things that they were happening. Most of these don't have the metopes; they did not survive, so they're just you will just see the triglyphs and something empty in the middle. But just imagine a metope with something like this kind of exists. So the Doric, they don't have a pediment at the top of something. It's just sort of ends like this. The corona, the cymatium, it has the cornice, and it sort of just ends. Something that's important to know that you'll see it later on, but the way that the Doric columns, they should never be on top of the metope. The Greek cared about a lot about order, cared a lot about where things were placed, and at the end of every Doric frieze and tablature, it always ended on a triglyph, and it sort of wrapped around and started again. But a Doric column can never be right at the middle of the metope, and that was something that was leading um, their designs. And now we go into the Ionic. Ionic comes from the city of Ionia. This is where it sort of so seeing it's a bit more decorative. It reflects its Oriental sources and it's a bit the tablatures is more simpler than Doric, but the capital and the bases are more artistic than the other ones. So that's something that we start seeing this what they call the volutes, and as you can see, it's a lot more decorative, and the volutes are many consider to be scrolls. And again, I think I mentioned it last time, but this one it's a bit more feminine, what Vitruvius called to be a bit more feminine. And you see the corona, the cornice, the frieze, and so you start seeing how uh, these, the Ionic and the Doric, they had something very clear on top. It was a whole sort of combination. This one with this. Later on, they start combining things, but it was very common. So here we don't see any triglyphs. We don't see metopes. So that's another way that you sort of can know which one, what kind of column it is. If it's Doric or Ionic, does it have metopes? Does it not have metopes? Something else that this one has, it has a base. Rather compared to the one we just seen, it just kind of flushes into the stylobate, which is the stem, which kind of seems more part of the architecture itself. But this one has itself base, something where it stands on. So it's a bit more slim, a bit more elegant, a bit more clean, and a bit more artistic on the top, and it has this fillets, this just adding this indentures inside to create it a bit more space and color. This is a temple of Hera, and you start seeing the different capital plan, different ways that they were using this column, and most of the entablature and all these things are really gone, so it's really hard to really know what was going on. What did they use? So sort of freezing a little bit, so I'll give it a couple seconds. There you are. And then we come to what is called the classical period. The classical period is probably the one we know the most. It's the one that we see a lot of the things really starting to really take shape and really start and the mature phase of the Greek architecture era. So if you, this is the one that most likely everyone really knows. So the Acropolis stands again in a hill in a very high place, and it's and you can start seeing, and here you see the different temples that are being erected. And again, maybe it wasn't so much for fortification, but it was too elevated because it was for the goddess. So it was something to show the world how this was really talked about. So something that it's we'll talk about is the Erection, which is right here in this. Again, what is this? It's a side plan. Um, and we see the Erection, and we see eventually we see the Parthenon, which is one of the most famous architectures, and also combined, we see that there was an old temple of Athena. So the Parthenon it's a temple to Athena, but it's interesting to know that there was already an existing temple to Athena that eventually they just called the Old Temple. That's how you know you have a lot of money. It's like, this is my new temple. I have an old temple. And the Erection, it's also an important thing that we'll see we'll talk about right now. Parthenon. The Parthenon was this huge temple to Athena. And this is the Parthenon appears to someone leaving the Propylaea and looking southeast. With many Greek temples, the building is said to the viewer looks up and see the two sides at once. So it's as you're going up and you start seeing this, you're going up, and I've actually been here and I've gotten to experience that same experience of going up and looking up and seeing um, this this temple and having that experience. So you start seeing this Doric columns, this Doric again, Doric, and one of the ways that you again talking about is it Doric, is it Ionian, is it Corinthian, and we didn't talk about Corinthians. I'll talk about it right now. Being this more masculine, you're seeing how it starts big and it looks very, very heavy. It looks very strong. Doric trying to make it feel like it's very, very, very strong. And you start seeing the triglyphs again, as I mentioned last time. The triglyph ends and it starts again. It wraps around, and the columns are, right here, and there's sort of spacing: triglyph, metope, triglyph, metope, triglyph, metope, triglyph, metope, triglyph, metope. This triangular part in the top is a pediment, where they would depict maybe the name, a lot of the decoration. And you can see a lot of things here in the back that, how it's being restored, and it's constantly being restored. And there's another view. The Doric use here is elongated to an almost ionic slenderness, and not all optical refinements are readily discernible, but to note, what they're trying to say is that, since it's so tall and so big, and 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 the image is really hard to know, but here you see pictures of people. So imagine this person here. It would be really like, given the scale, the person was here. Imagine how small you would feel in this building. So it's so the Doric are usually feel heavy, but these are so long that it kind of makes you feel, even pushing your eyes to the heavens, pushing your eyes to the goddess, and becoming a bit more slender, more ionic like. And so again, this is a clear way of seeing the triglyphs 1, 2, 3, metope, and you start seeing how they put these always on top of the triglyphs. So it's very easy. There's no base. They do have some sort of flutes. There's the entablature is sort of missing a lot of the things. The pediment is broken. Uh, and the story, I really want to share this story. This is how they imagine the pediment that is missing would have looked, depicting the story, the story of Hera, Zeus, Poseidon, Athena. So let me share this story because it's very interesting now that we are here. And so the story is that the Greek people they needed to decide who they were going to build the temple for. So they were thinking it was either going to be for Poseidon or Athena. So there was this, so what they did is that they said, okay, give us a gift and we'll choose whoever has the best gift, that's who we're going to be choosing to have that's who we're going to build the temple for. And so what would happen is that Zeus, he's like, okay, he's, the god of the war. He's Poseidon is the god of war, of the ocean, sorry. And so the story goes is that he gets his trident and smashes into the rock, and that is seen in the Erection. I don't know, they have an image for that, but you can Google that. It's a very they have this hole in the this opening in the Erection, and there's this broken stone in the Erection saying that that's where the trident came, and smashed the trident. And when he smashed it, salt water came. So what he was trying to give to his people was the gift of sailing, giving the ability to sail and to conquer new lands and to give this. But Athena, what she does as she gives him an olive branch and saying, giving them the gift of wisdom and peace and communication, and saying, you know, they can based on peace and wisdom rather than just on war. So it was because of that they went with Athena, and they built her um, a temple to Athena. And so inside there would have been this huge statue of Athena that's now missing, but they've done some reconstructions. I think there's one in Nashville. Um, and so this is what I was talking to you about, the Erectilon. And it's this somewhere here. It's behind, in the back of here is where it's said the Poseidon. Also here, I think it's this one. I believe it's this one, but they believe that this is the tree that an olive tree, which is representing the tree that Athena gave, or that the olive branch that she gave. It's not. They have said that they've planted it there themselves. It's an interesting story how they said that's originally there was one that no one had planted. It had just grown there. So that was the gift that Athena had given them. Uh, Something that it's also seen from this building, the Erectly lawn, is the Caryatid maidens. So why this is interesting is because we've talked about Ionic and Corinthian and Doric columns, but these are also serving as columns. But despite they are serving as columns, they're taking the shape of women, and which these women they're called the Caryatid. Um, and it's really interesting if you see their story. I won't take too much time on it, but just Google their story. It's an interesting story of how they sort of suffered. They had to go through some hardships, and they wanted to, in a way, remember these women by exemplifying and putting them in this uh, in this architecture. And again, very different from Egyptian sculpture we had seen. These women, instead of the Egyptians seem very static, these you see them more alive, a bit more almost in place without even having the ability to be moving. Uh, uh, going back to the chronological time that we had seen, one of the times was Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great was this great general that did a lot, even though he, in a very short time, and eventually he died. And when he dies, um, others take the ruling, which kind of goes through some difficult time. But right after he died, it kind of led to the Hellenistic age. They led to a very important time called the Hellenistic age. And again, I told you that in those times, the way they called Greece, it was in Greek or Greece. They called it Helen, Hellas. Sorry. Um, and so which you know the it comes from Hellenistic times. And so in this time it was a time where the Greek culture started really influencing everyone. It started really becoming a big part of this, influencing the whole world. until eventually they get conquered by the Roman Empire. But this is a time where the Greek sort of gives to the world proportion, poise, the perfection of the human body, the simplicity, the perspective, and the harmony. So that's something that is very, it's a very short introduction into the Greek world. Honestly, we could talk so much more about it. But I'll just end with this Korean column. And this Corinthian column is from the city of Corinth, and it's said that it has uh, this leaves from the acanthus plant. And the story goes, I think there was an image. Um, uh, I think I don't know if it's here, but the story goes that there was this sort of base, this sort of stone base that was sitting on top of a this plant, the acanthus plant, and it started just simply growing and growing, eventually covering this whole column, and that's how leading eventually to what the Corinthian column will look. So the Corinthian column is is the easiest one to really recognize from the three orders. So it's Ionic, it's Doric, and it's the Corinthian. And then so the Doric, remember, was masculine, has no base. It's very simple. The Ionic more feminine, so it has this volume, scroll-like with the base. And the Corinthian is it's just remembering the story of plants. So it has this very ornate, very naturalistic, more artistic approach of flowers and connecting it to the sort of mimicking, which another word for that is the mimesis, so mimicking the natural way. So I think most of it, this is, it starts, the end of the chapter, you can just go over really quickly on it, but it starts talking about different places and how the Greek world starts um, expressing themselves and creating a community again. So during the Hellenistic age, they just start really expressing their culture, creating this community, and they start creating what is this sort of amphitheaters. And I've actually been here and I've gone to sit here and just for a long time just sketching and drawing and really meditating, and it was a really peaceful time. It's a really fun time to do that. And having this agoras, which was this sort of community place, this sort of place where everyone can just gather and the agoras, or the plan of the agora, it was just a place um, where many people can where any big information from the rulers, from the governors, from any political news, they would come here and they would give, and everyone would gather in this agora, and so it was become this community place. Sometimes it would do little shops and things like this, and also it sort of combines with stoas. And stoas, it's similar to the agora. Agora is more of a public place, more community gathering, but stoas were it's kind of in the word stoa, store, but it was this covered place where it was a merchant place where people can have their shops and different stores. What's interesting from the word agora is that nowadays, if you have agoraphobia, it means you have the fear of being in a public place or being in a place very crowded. So that's an easy way to, you can remember this, of what an agora was. Agoraphobia, being afraid of being in public spaces, and combining it with all these things. Um, Again, the most important thing that you start seeing is the different, what style, you start seeing more this harmony, this perfection, and you start seeing the order of the architecture. So this conclusion is, the Minoan and the Crete does suggest some kind of, they were experimenting on plan and perception. The Mycenaeans, they created the Megaron, which is a sort of which eventually leads to the way the Greek temple plan, and we've talked about with the cella, with the porch, with the main entrance, And these spaces later, the Greeks added various columns and configurations. So the Greeks, they played with what they, with the antes, the prostyle, the amphistyle, the peripheral, to be more often in combining this. The Mycenaeans with the stone ability, as we saw with the lion gate, and how they were able to manipulate stone, it leads to the Doric and the Ionic and the Corinthian form as these. That's what eventually become a classical language of architecture. But what's at the core of this language was the arithmetic proportion, this idealized beauty encoded with the values of the city, which is why temples like the Parthenon are meant to be read, not just seen. So this is why it's important to know what was the context, because these buildings were really telling a story, that through the sculptures, through all of the entablatures and metapies and all these things, they're telling stories that they were probably familiarized with. Uh, uh, so the Minoans, they gave way to the Hellenistic period to geometric and regularity, axiality, and to eventually the Rome, um, conquering and ending, the form, ending this era and leading to the new era. But I think hopefully you took something from this, and I'll go really quickly into some of the flashcards. And this is, honestly, if you go over this flashcards, right now, it'll help you a lot for the quiz that will be coming up. The quiz number 1. The quiz covers chapter 1 and chapter 2. So this is not covering the complete thing. It's completely just this set of flashcards is only covering the Greek part of the chapter 2 part of the quiz. So you still need to study a little bit of chapter 1. But what is a cella? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. What is a cella? Answer there on your own, just to have a little quiz on your own if you're watching this. And hopefully you answered was the inner chamber in a temple. It was the inner part of the temple. Stoas. We talked about this a couple of seconds ago. It sort of rhymes with stores. So it was truly urban buildings providing space for merchants to trade in, inviting citizens. And I've created this quiz, this cards from the book itself. I just sort of highlighted things and it allows me to create a card. So you can do this yourself. The Parthenon was dedicated to who? The Parthenon, which is one of the most famous, was dedicated to Athena. And remember, I shared the story of Poseidon and Athena sort of competing to see who would get the patronage, when Athena was the one with her gift of the olive branch. What are the grooves down the side of the columns called? And these are called the stone column shafts in Greek architecture are called fluted. Um, so they're called the flutes inside vertically with concave groups in a matter similar. So this vertical concave groups are called the flutes. Main decorative feature of the Ionic order column. So what was very different from Doric to Ionic was that the Ionic was more feminine and more decorative. And in the top, you see this scroll-like things, the scroll-like shapes, which called the volutes. So the main decorative feature are the volutes or the scroll-like shapes. The orders of architecture, there's 3 of them. Hopefully you remember them. It's Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. In the Minoan civilization, Gnosis was what? What was Gnosis? We said it was others of these, but this was the biggest one that eventually, when others were torn down, this one was the only one that was rebuilt. It was a temple. All the Minoan place, it was a palace, sorry. But Gnosis alone was rebuilt. What the archaeologists call the first period of ancient Greece. There's 2 sort of names, but the one we'll go with is Archaic period, also the Dark Ages, but we just go with Archaic period. The largest city of the Mycenaeans. What was the largest city? The largest city of the Mycenaeans takes its name from the Mycenae. It's the largest, but not only the largest city of the Mycenaeans. is the Mycenaeans. So it takes its name from Mycenae. Um, Mythical monster. What was this monster? It was half bull, half human. So it was the Minotaur, half man, half bull that ate humans. The capital of the Minoans. So it was the capital of the Minoans. It was Knossos. So this was on Crete, and this is the capital of the Knossos. So we talked a little bit about this. Uh, they primarily lived where? In the island of Crete, based on the island of Crete. We talked about that at the beginning too. The colonies and the porch of the maidens. So there's this women that I said you should Google the story of why they're there, and they're also called the Caryatide here at the end, and they're right here at the end of the of this the Erection. And the orders is found on the Parthenon. So what was the order found in the Parthenon? And we talked about this, imagining standing there, and it was the Doric. Remember how there's no base, and it was meant to be more heavy, meant to be more stronger. Uh, since it was a temple, it was good to have that sense of, and also it's a temple to the goddess of war and wisdom. So they wanted to make it stand out. So what is this called? What is this top part? And it's the pediment. And the triangular piece of wall above the entablature is called the pediment. So this is important to know. I remember we talked about it, how most of them are sort of gone, but this is sort of an idea of how they looked. So what is this building? We just saw it with the Erection. Oh, I just said Erection. With the Kertiad, sorry. But it's called the Erection in Athens. The period of ancient Greece after the death of Alexander the Great. Again, how did Greece was called? Greece was originally called Helen, and so that helps you understand the there's a but it's basically saying Hellenistic age. The Minoan civilization was unknown to the world until when? When did the Sir Alexander, the one that kind of did all the reconstruction? When did he find it? It was in the 1900s, and Sir Arthur Evans. That's when he really changed everything by showing us this piece of architecture into the world. The last thing that I want to talk to you about, and I'll end with this, is that the Greek architectural orders. And hopefully you've seen these. There's an assignment that you have to draw some. So you already have the link to this in that assignment, the class participation assignment. And this one goes really, really, really into detail into the different orders, the Doric order, and you have to draw these. So hopefully this will help you uh, have that understanding better. But yeah, this fluting, the stylobate, the capital, and the tablature is a bit more simplified, a little bit easier than the other one. So the triglyph, the frieze is this part with combined with the triglyph and the metapiece, the frieze. The tablature is combining those two, the architrave. And something that I want you to notice is the pediment is not really selected here because it's not technically part of the Doric order. It's on its own. Sometimes it's in the Doric order, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's combined with another order. So the pediment itself is not a part of the order. But this is usually when you see a Doric order, you would see the combination of these. And here you see an example of the Doric order as we had seen in the Parthenon in the book. The Ionic one is, a bit more stylistic. We see this volute. We see this scroll-like shape with the flute, and we have some images. And we have another images of the Erection, where the Caryatides are on the other side. And here you can see a combination, the sort of a combination of the Doric we had just seen, the stereobate, the stylobate, this one a bit more specific, necking, and all these things. But then here we see the Ionic order. The Ionic order having these flutes, this fillet, the volute, the abacus, the moldings. So you start seeing how it's very different, especially this part of the entablature is very part. The frieze, this part is the one that's a bit more different because here you don't see that, the triglyphs and all of that. The Corinthian, as we mentioned, is this sort of leaf-like, mimicking the nature of the leaves, and here, it's a bit more less ornate in this area, but it's a lot more ornate in the capital, and of its on the top of the head of the architecture. So that's sort of it. Go through the book and keep continuing, trying to watch some of the videos about it if you're really more interested in it. There's a lot more about the Greek that I know this lesson might have been a bit too long, hopefully not too long, um, but hopefully you got enough information that now you can, that it intrigues you enough to understand more of if this was a long lecture, you can just imagine that we could talk about the Greek for weeks. Um, so hopefully there was enough information here to spike your interest and just continue working on the different assignments as we continue with this class. Thank you.